Last month, I interviewed David Coletto, who's the CEO of Abacus Data, about a survey he'd done around Canadian politics. And now he's got a follow-up survey that deals with Pierre Poilievre, who is the Conservative Party leadership candidate. I'm going to talk to him about that. Welcome to the interview, David.
Great to be here, Markham. Nice to see you.
Now, I refer to your previous survey in our interview all the time because what it showed is that 21% of Canadians are anxious progressives, 29%, 28% were anxious conservatives. So these are people who have got real concerns. They're worried about their economic future, their job, whether they can pay their mortgage, those kinds of things. And they're open to a populist message. Along comes Pierre Poilievre, who is generally considered a populist candidate. What was the response from this survey?
Well, what we did in this survey was we took the video that he produced when he announced his leadership campaign and showed it to respondents and then asked two questions after they'd watched it. One, do you agree or disagree with the content of that video and the message? And two, if Pierre Poilievre were to become Conservative Party leader, does that make you more or less likely or have no effect on your willingness to vote Conservative? And what we learned was, I think is somewhat surprising to many people, which is about half or just over half of Canadians we surveyed, 18 plus, said they either strongly or somewhat agreed with the message in that video. Only 24% outright disagreed, and the rest were in the middle. And then when we asked, would you be open or consider voting Conservative, 49% said they either definitely would or probably would consider voting Conservative. And so what this shows is, again, without any filter, I just put up his video. People could see who he was and what he was saying, that there is a clear and broad audience for Mr. Poilievre's message. And I think that's explaining some of the energy and excitement that we're seeing around his campaign in the leadership race right now.
Now, in the last couple of elections, both former leaders, Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole, campaigned harder on the right to get the leadership candidacy, and then tacked to the middle during the election campaign and lost. And there was a lot of criticism of that from some quarters in the Conservative Party. But Mr. Poilievre is taking a very, very different view. I mean, forget carbon plan or carbon tax and climate plan, for instance. He will have nothing to do with any of it, which is in marked contrast to his predecessors. And that seems to me that maybe if he has found himself a constituency, there will be no tacking to the center.
Well, I think, the way I view it is he is really carving out a unique position, maybe one that we, in the normal paradigm, doesn't look like a left or right kind of perspective. Because if you actually listen to what he's saying, it's pure populism, right? And populism is one of those, if it's an ideology at all, is one that I think can capture a much broader group of ideas, right? I actually believe and he's had other videos where he's in Vancouver talking about housing, and the way that he describes the way that some Canadians are being locked out of owning a home sounds more like a class-based Marxist argument, right? That the rich and the powerful are controlling the system and preventing everybody else from benefiting from it, really has an appeal. So I think there's no doubt he is a conservative, and he's talking about freedom and getting government off the back of people. But he's doing it with an implicit argument that I think broadens its appeal. So it's no longer about being so, culturally conservative or socially conservative, instead saying, look, there are those who have, and there are those who have not. And the have-nots are a much larger group, and the haves are making it harder for the have-nots to move forward. And I think that type of conservatism, as he's putting forward, not only appeals to his party's base and the membership, but I think would find an audience with people who may never have thought of voting Conservative before.
Well, let's talk about that, because your survey showed that there is not a strong correlation between support for Poilievre and education. It's around age, and in turn, and secondarily would be, I guess, vaccination status.
Yeah, age seems to be the most important driver, which is really interesting. I mean, we had done some research around the convoys and occupation in Ottawa and elsewhere that showed younger Canadians appeared to be and signaled to us in our surveys and other surveys were more open and willing to support the basic ideas there. And so in our research, again, if you watch the video and you watch what Mr. Poilievre is saying, he is making an explicit call to younger Canadians saying, you are being left out. And I don't think it's surprising that younger Canadians who are feeling more anxious about both their economic situation, about their ability to own a home, about the future of themselves, seeing somebody who's saying, I recognize there's a problem, I'm telling you who's causing it, and I've offered up a solution. Whether that solution is reasonable or realistic at this stage is beyond, I think, our conversation, but it has the ability, I think, to connect. And that's really remarkable, because what we would typically see is older Canadians reacting more positively to conservative ideas or a conservative politician. He seemingly flipped things on its head, which is, I think, one of the ways that he could surprise people if he does win the leadership and then seeks to become prime minister in the next general election.
Now, in the last survey, you had a group on which you and I probably are members, the professional progressives make about 11% of Canadians. We have a very rosy view of the future, unlike the other two groups, the anxious groups. And I think your argument here in this survey is that folks like us we're kind of missing the boat when it comes to Poilievre's appeal. We don't understand it. Media doesn't understand it. The depth of his appeal to that part of the electorate.
Yeah, and I think I'm able to put my bias on notice and say I know where I am. And so when I or others like me, or maybe you, Markham, hear Mr. Poilievre speak, we react quite aggressively, negatively, right? We've said, how could somebody be saying these things, and how could anyone agree with him? But we always have to remember, again, that our outlook on life, in part because we're fortunate to be where we are, that professional progressive group, when you ask them, has the pandemic made you better or worse off? More say better off than anybody else. More say they feel optimistic about the future of the economy. They don't feel threatened by it. And so when he's out there saying things like, everything's rigged and the system's broken, and I'm going to come in and free you up, let you have control over your life again, that is a powerful message to people who don't feel in control of their lives. And that's the majority of this country right now. And I think it's been that way for a while, but he's trying to realign our politics and break down things that would prevent people from voting conservative in the past, maybe issues like abortion or social issues. He's trying to move past the climate conversation and not make that a defining issue for people, and instead really focus in on their pocketbook and that broader populist message.
I can't help but notice the similarities, David, between Poilievre and Trump. Now, the messaging is very different. Poilievre is not a Trumpian politician in the sense we think of Donald Trump and his rallies and his speaking style and so on. But he's tapping into the same sentiments in his own way. And it seems like we have this saying in Canada that whatever happens in the US, 5 years later, it'll show up in Canada, and right on schedule. Here we are, a populist candidate who is generating a lot of excitement at the federal level.
No, and I think he is very much tapping into the same emotion and the same anxiety, but doing it I think you're right, in a different way. Whereas Donald Trump just makes fun of people and kind of throws, bombs and doesn't offer up a coherent alternative or a coherent solution. Where Mr. Poilievre is actually, I think, even more effective than Donald Trump is he actually has an inherent ideology to him, right? So you do get the sense that even if you can, economists might disagree, experts might disagree that what he's offering won't work or can't work. But from the average person's perspective, he seems to be in control and have expertise on what he's talking about in a way Donald Trump never could. Donald Trump cannot talk about monetary policy. Donald Trump doesn't know, how an economy actually works. Pierre Poilievre comes off as though he does, and that makes him, I think, even more effective at not just diagnosing the problem, which Donald Trump did quite well, but offering up a solution that seems to have some weight behind it, and that then brings people who might otherwise be skeptical about somebody who just points out problems but has no solution to fix them. Well,
that raises an interesting question, because while Poilievre may have solutions, I have to say, like, I've listened to what he says on oil and gas, and I find it wildly implausible. He suggested that Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, should perhaps play a larger role in Canada's monetary policy. I mean, I see economists and other experts on social media ridiculing this, because it almost is Trumpian in its way. It's ridiculous. But somehow he makes it come off so that the average person who isn't an expert on monetary policy or oil and gas industry, they buy it.
Well, this is the power of populism, right? Is not only can you need a villain. And so he's identified people, organizations, institutions that are causing the problems that people perceive to be feeling. And then he's saying, when they challenge him, he can point to them and say, look, you guys are you are the problem. You're going to attack me. You're going to attack my ideas, but you created this mess in the first place. And so what that does, it just reinforces his narrative, right? So that signals, if you want to challenge Pierre Poilievre, don't ridicule him. Don't ridicule the people who support him, but start to unpack the ideas, because implicitly, what I've learned, especially over the last 2 years around this pandemic, is trust is the basis for everything. And what we now have is an increasing number of Canadians, like we had in the US, as you said, 5 years before us, who have started to distrust institutions and political leaders and business leaders. And so if we're out there, or if they're out there opposing or offering counter arguments, if people don't trust those people implicitly, then they're not going to listen, and they're not going to take him at face value. So that means he can be very effective at arguing a point and not really having to defend it, because he can just say, look, oh, here they go again. They're going to ridicule me. They're going to make fun of us. They're going to tell us we're wrong, when we all know that they've benefited from the world they've created. And as a result, if you elect me, I'm going to drain the swamp or blow up Parliament, not actually blow up Parliament, but break the system so that we can rebuild it so that it works for everybody. And that's a message we hear both on the populist left and on the populist right, that right now is only appearing from Mr. Poilievre. We don't have an equivalent left populist right now in Canada that's doing that on the left side. So he's got all of that space in which he can connect with those two key anxious groups.
David, always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks, Markham.